And we're back for another edition of the Astro Weather, and I'm your Astro Weatherman, Robert Phoenix. How do you like the beautiful backdrop behind me? This is courtesy of my buddy Whit down in New Mexico, who sent me some of his photos, some of his glorious New Mexican sun and sky photos. And so there you go. And if you're, I think a few of you sent me some photos to use. But if you want me to use your photo as the thumbnail and the backdrop for the Astro Weather, go to RPM 1122 at yahoo.com. Go there and attach a photo and pass it along. And I'd be happy to use it, just like this one, this beautiful photo of the great New Mexican skies. All right. Whit, I'm in New Mexico too. It's Whit, W-H-I-T. I don't think he's in chat, but he probably reads the chat afterwards. Beautiful day to you too. Rainbows and butterflies. Rainbows and butterflies. I don't know what got a hold of me. I was channeling some kind of 70s thing. Christine is here. What's going on? Christine, Kelly, and the kids are in the house. Moon Sprout. There she is, the lovely and talented one. Dr. Joan S. checking in with us. Hanging Laundry's here. What's up, Hanging? Blau shirts. What is the email for that? I wasn't on chat that day. RPM 1122 at yahoo.com. Do you have a sunrise photo that you want to send me so I can use it for the show? Pass it along, and I'll give you attribution, just like I did with Whit. Let's see. You're welcome. You are welcome. Who else do we have? TDF. What's happening, TDF? We're glad you're here too. Pengridi's here. Soros Maya McMahon. Hey, taking a break from my online working course for work. Well, we're here. We're your kind of starry cup of brew at the beginning of the day. Speaking of cup of brew, there's Warlanda's cup of coffee with Scream. Morning to you as well. William Pals is here. What's going on, William? Good to see you. At least in name. Maya Rose. We got a good crew here today. Good crew. Don't forget to hit the like button. That's an important thing. Why is it important? Because it puts this show higher up in the algorithmic ratings and other people get to see it. We get on the feed, and theoretically, that's how we grow the channel. And it reminds the AI, the agents of AI at YouTube that I matter, that this show matters, that you matter, that you count. And you do that by just hitting like. And by the way, if you've subscribed, you may want to subscribe again. Hit the bell, because we know what happens. You get unsubscribed. And it's always good maintenance to see on your channels, to see if you're still subscribed to not just me, but other content creators that you like, that somehow or some way might not always be the most politically correct expression of this medium. Are we in retrograde? Boy, we are close, aren't we? I have the chart of the day. Why don't we get into it? And Harriet, how's it going, Harriet? Let's get into the chart of the day. Let us tarry no longer. Let us embrace the moment of our destiny. All right. As of 8 a.m., 13th December 2023, Mercury's retrograde. 8 degrees Capricorn. This is what we're talking about. This is what I'm talking about. Lots of returns. This is going to be a Christmas where lots of gifts are returned. That's coming. Mostly because people will need the money. They'll say, do you have a receipt for that? By any chance? Just in case something goes wrong with it. Not that I want to take it back, but just in case something goes wrong, I may need that receipt. You're going to see, I'll go on the record. I'm going to go on the record and I'm going to lay it down right now that the retail industry this holiday will see a record amount of returns for gifts. Now, they won't tell you that, though. They'll keep that on the down low. They no matter how shitty or fucked up the political system is or how dystopic the predictive programming gets, they're not going to tell you that. Because they want to continue to feign consumer confidence. Although I will say this. I talked about this last week. The United States right now is pumping more oil than it's ever pumped before. And this is under the Biden administration. And I think it has very little to do with Biden, by the way. And I think I went into this either on a Sunday night show or on a Friday show. But essentially what they've done is the big oil is kind of greedy, right? Like anything big is greedy, right? It just needs more. And what they would do is they would get into these fracking situations. By the way, fracking has, and again, I'm not here to sell you fracking, but the fracking that was taking place in the 2010s versus what's happening now is a very different operation. A lot of times they pardon the pun, refine these techniques in real time, right? It's kind of like, hey, let's make some drugs and send them out to the people with a minimum amount of trials. Oh, look at this. Maybe we should change a few things. It's not really working the way we thought it would. Don't worry, we got that money set aside for the payouts. But that said, they what they would do with these wells is they would hit them, and they would kind of move on, and so they would and why they would do this is that they would establish sort of more territory for wells, right? So the more territory, whether they're pumping or not, it's going to be just essentially better for them. But instead of doing this kind of scattershot, move on from well to well to well, what they've done is they've refined the efficiency for pre-existing wells. So they're actually getting more out of the ground with their pre-existing wells than setting up a bunch of new wells with new leases. I was kind of shocked when I found that out. It's like, really? That's interesting. Huh. So this is an example of the marketplace adjusting to what happens with the government. And the government says, well, we're going to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. We're going to shut down new leases in Alaska. And then, okay, well, we'll just refine our current processes, make them more efficient, and stay with them longer. And that's what's happened. So anyway, it's political stuff. Let's get into the but Mercury retrograde again. If we're talking about kind of uncovering things, which theoretically is one of the better applications for Mercury retrograde, is to uncover something, right? To go back and that's what we're going to do today over on 15 minutes. Tom, I think, has put the link inside of chat. It's going to be live on Boxcast at 9/11. And I'm going to go back and look at, Alex Jones and what was happening with Alex Jones circa 2016, and now the return of. So I'm going to get into. It's a definitely Mercury retrograde topic. All right, so we still have the moon in Sagittarius, and we're still in the new moon phase, but now we're much more clearly in that square with Neptune, right? Much more clearly. And it's very interesting in terms of these Neptunian squares, which can create this kind of frothy, sort of blind uh, zealousness. Like I am just, I am just so convinced of my own beliefs. I am so emotionally invested in my own beliefs that when the Neptune that the Neptune square puts me at risk in some ways for being over invested in my beliefs, of having too much emotional energy or too much juice. And that's kind of where we are with this Neptune square. Today is a big religion day. Today is a big religion day. And I say religion, Orthodox faith, of course, of which there are three, and they all theoretically come from the same part of the world, right? So it isn't just, well, today the bottom drops out of Christianity, but I would say that there is, and in fact, I was reading something on Twitter about who was it, the Pope's critic. Somebody was saying that he was the anti-pope because the Pope needs the anti-pope, right? So you have the white pope and the black pope, which is a weird part of the whole potpourri scene. Potpourri. Um, but I talked about this on Sunday night, and this feels to me like a pope kind of day, right? This is a pope kind of day. The Pope, again, whoever this guy is Sagittarius, right? So it's a Berglio, that's his name, and then Vigano is supposedly the. I've heard Vigano is the anti-pope. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this is where we get into this whole idea. Sagittarius is a very judgmental sign at times. If you haven't noticed it, it's Sagittarius is thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening indeed, right? I mean, it's when Sagittarius, finds the truth or finds the word. Boy, they don't have a lot of, like, that mutability goes right out the door. And this is one of those days where I will say, judge not, lest ye shall be judged. With all this heavy, I mean, this is a pattern too, with the sun coming in and squaring Neptune over the next few days, right? there's a greater sense of, I would say, collective vulnerability, but on the other hand, there's also a greater sense of kind of ego zealotry in the air. And you have to be careful of being right at all costs with this aspect. And that extends way out, not just in some casual interaction with somebody who you think on Twitter, or a casual interaction with somebody in 3D, right? This extends all the way out to the finite boundaries of what we think we know. Because the certitude of Sagittarius, and when Sagittarius has that certitude, it's like, look out, man. They're it's like the horse has left the barn, so to speak. And there's a power behind it. There is a power behind that kind of conviction and certitude that truly Sagittarius can deliver the goods on. But when the Neptune square comes in, it's clearly an aspect where no matter how much or how certain you think things are, there's a pretty good chance during a cycle like this, you'll be humbled. You'll be shown, um, you'll be shown just how little you might know. And this will come across mainly in interactions with others. Although when we get into Pisces and Sagittarius, we are entering into the realm of the divine, right? So even the interactions with others begin to fall under that rubric. Everything becomes a lesson, which is really what Sagittarius is about, right? Everything is a life lesson. That's the best part of Sagittarius. You're always kind of learning, right? You're always learning from life. You're always learning from your mistakes. You're always learning from your trials, your errors, even to your accomplishments. I mean, that's the nature of Sagittarius. It's all grist for the mill. And Neptune with the square brings up vulnerability. There's a breach in the system, really, because Sagittarius rules systems. So there's a breach in the system, and it tests beliefs, right? So the square is testing beliefs, and when you test one, or when one's beliefs get tested, especially with the moon here, which is really kind of at the edge of the galactic center, if they don't match up to the kind of the highest version of truth that we can wrap our heads around, it can be a very humbling experience. Very humbling. It reminds me of when I was in college and I thought I knew fucking everything. Well, I mean, what college kid doesn't think that at some point in time? Some of you may have been more mature than I was. But and this has to do with Sagittarius, because it's a Sagittarian lesson. College represents Sagittarius, right? The ninth house is college's higher learning. Teachers are the priest class of the former monastic schools, which is what the university system comes out of. Thank you, Jesuits. And I remember just spewing shit one day. I think we were talking about Lao Tse or Buddha. It was either the Analects of Confucius or the Tao Te Ching. I forget which one. And I just started talking shit, thinking that I knew what I was talking about. And this teacher, and I'm forever grateful for this guy. He just pinned me to the fucking wall. I mean, literally, metaphorically pinned me to the wall, and just kept asking me, "Where do you see that? Where do you see that in the text? Where do you see it?" And I was so fucking embarrassed, right? It was like, it was good for me. It was really good for me. And instead of being pissed off, or indignant and taking it personally, I just, at that time I was sitting close to the front of the class. And then I went to the back of the fucking class. It's like, go to the back of the class. I put myself back there and I just shut the fuck up. I just shut the fuck up and listened and said, "Look, dude, you got a lot to learn here." That was clear. This is what we're talking about, right? And this is the Neptune square. We find out how much we don't know and how much we identify with in a striding kind of way, that we become aware that it's not the totality of the whole or the bigger picture. The downside is if you kind of slump below the horizon, right? There's that kind of midpoint, and if you slump below that, then your self-esteem, your moorings, your anchors to 3D become very precipitous, and then you're headed into a crisis situation. Not all crises are bad. Those kinds of bottoming outs aren't always the worst thing. If you're trapped with a bunch of illusion, and this Neptune square illuminates illusion. If you're trapped with a bunch of illusion, if you have too much of it going on, then it's the best thing that could happen, because you'll unburden yourself of the things that aren't real or the things that aren't true, and then you get to step back and say, okay, well, show me what is true and show me what is real in my life. And that is in many ways the first process of awakening. And the ardent seeker who wishes to awaken, whether it's a awakening into this Machiavellian world of dystopic destinations, or whether it's a more complex occult schema, or whether it's just awakening to the illusions that one's propped up in one's own life. They're all kind of the same in some ways, and it's the first real step to true awakening. And so I would not be surprised, if this is a big part of today, and what people, not just in their own lives, but what we see out there as a projection on the screen of reality, and we identify with certain people or certain causes or um, certain institutions that we have put our full faith and credit and trust into. With the Neptune square, it's like, oh shit, them too? Question mark, right? So this is kind of a big energy right now. And then, later today, I think we got a voided course coming up with the moon, but later today, tonight, the moon's moving into Capricorn, and it's still kind of new, right? But the potential of what we talked about with the new moon yesterday, even today, like, empty out if your cup isn't empty, empty out your cup and see what you want to fill it with. And the moon will still be fairly new when it moves into Capricorn, right? It's still technically a full moon, but it's very different. It's not mutable. So the mutability of the moon allows for there to be flexibility. When the moon is in Capricorn, it goes into a cardinal state, and the moon is in its detriment in Capricorn. So it's going to have a collision course coming up with Mercury retrograde. And I think we're going to be talking about that probably tomorrow. That's going to be an interesting conjunction with the moon on Mercury retrograde. Definitely political implications. Clearly political implications. What am I thinking of here? What does it feel like? I'm gonna go into the real estate market here with the moon coming in and with Mercury. This whole real estate thing is, we get into Taurus and Uranus. I'm sorry, Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus when we start talking about real estate. This whole real estate thing is fascinating because interest rates are up. But the problem here is that companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, I mean, they've bought up a shit ton of properties. So there's not as much inventory on the market. Like, they've created this weird kind of ceiling where if you had a ton of inventory on the market, even if interest rates were high, there would be a more competitive playing field because there would just be more choices and more options for people. So even though the interest rates would be high, the cost of the houses would go down because, supply and demand, right? But because BlackRock and Vanguard and these other companies, this is all in Capricorn territory, have bought huge tranches of residential property, some of which they're holding on to, some of which they turn into rentals, some of which will be occupied by the new citizens, right? What it does, it creates an artificial ceiling on supply and demand. So there's something coming up with the real estate market. And I think we're going to see that, especially with this retrograde. And I'm wondering if out of the blue they'll lower interest rates. I tend not to I tend not to think that they will, because they think that they have a handle on inflation, whatever, which they really don't, because they just keep printing money. But I wonder if there's going to be a surprise drop in the prime. And I wonder if this Mercury retrograde is going to bring that about. The other thing is that there could be a whole slew of arms that are about to get triggered. And I wonder how people are gonna how well they're gonna deal with that. So arms being an adjustable rate mortgage. There's real estate people in chat, and maybe they can speak to this, but that's my sense here, right? We've got this moon coming in, represents the home, right? And then Mercury retrograde. It's like, okay, what's going to be rolled back? What's going to be revealed in some ways? The other thing too is Capricorn is also very much related to the commercial real estate market, which is something not a lot of people talk about, unless they're referencing WeWork. But is that what's called, WeWork? Those building, all those buildings that they bought. Anyway, what else do we have? Let's see. Well, we're still in that trine with Mars and the Sun with Chiron. And in fact, Mars is coming closer into that trine. It's one of these, I tell you, if you make a mistake today, right? If you are fully aware of something faulty in your belief system, just admit it and correct it and move on. The more that you dig in and say, I'm right, and you run around and look for chapter and verse to validate your position, that is not the course of action. The course of action is admit you were wrong, correct it quickly, and move on. This is the next 12 hours are really good for that. And even a little bit beyond, let's say the next 24 hours. Because when the moon moves into Capricorn, there isn't that kind of fluidity, right? Like you could, Sagittarius always manages to get away with shit. It's amazing, right? It's just amazing, like how wild and kind of carefree Sagittarius can be. And look at Richard Pryor, who's a Sagittarius. The guy fucking set himself on fire, and he came back and he still had a career. I mean, to me, that's like, all right, yeah, holy fire, Sagittarian fire. Richard, get the lesson, but it's a very extreme version of what I'm talking about. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because once that moon moves into Capricorn, there's judgment. Now, Sagittarius can be a judgmental sign. Don't get me wrong. We talked about that at the start, the onset. But with the square with Neptune, it becomes fluid, much more fluid. And there's something more about the moon as it relates to the self, because it's so close to the sun in the chart, that it's more about, well, clearly there's the mundane aspect, which we talked about with the Pope, religion, etc. But it really relates to you because of also this being in close proximity with the sun. That said, when the moon goes into Capricorn, there is more, I would say, institutional judgment, right? Kind of like, okay, well, if you don't self-manage and take care of yourself, and whatever that is, as it relates to things that you've fumbled, lost, right? If you don't do that, when the moon moves into Capricorn, it'll do it for you, which is going to be a lot less pleasant. than you just sort of fessing up here and say, yep, made a mistake, and really, do your best to correct that and move on. Because really, Chiron uh, is encouraging this activity, this kind of action, and owning up to whatever it is that theoretically you may have stepped out of bounds with. We still have this Venus Saturn trine. It's sort of coming to an end, a bit of an end here, because Venus is going to be at 11 degrees tomorrow, and it's really outside of the furthest orb. So there's still time today for anchoring and establishing meaningful connections through partnership, contracts, and relating. Um, it's interesting because there's also this opposition going on with Jupiter and Uranus. This this reminds me of the two donut talk that we had last week. Because down here, this is not the two donut talk, right? The opposition is like, come on, come on, come on. Take a bite of that apple. Take a bite of that apple. And over here, it's like, if you just wait a little bit, you're going to find out that you're in an amazing place and all shall be revealed, right? So there is a bit of impatience here. It's like, come on, when am I going to get it? When am I going to get it? When am I going to get it? What's my relationship to the thing that I feel intensely connected to? And am I willing to be patient for that thing? I also feel like this is one of those days where people try to talk you out of something. Follow those conversations. So what I mean by that is that if you have a preferred or prepared course of action with something, just track how many people try to give you different advice and try to talk you out of it. Because I feel like that's in the air as well. I think real estate is a story. And when we get into Scorpio, we get into things like contracts, especially Venus and Scorpio, contracts, loans, other people's money, interest rates, right? Be careful for falling into get rich quick schemes when it comes to refinancing, right? Be wary. Be wary of what you're laying down there. Okay, do we have anything else? I think that's it. I think we're good. I'm just looking around. All right. Let's get into our star of the day. I need to go into, I know what I need to do. I got to go back into here and put up the banner. Let's banner up. There we go. So your True Hemp Science star of the day is Lester Bangs. And you may ask yourself, who the fuck is Lester Bangs? Well, if you were into rock and roll during the late 60s and up through the 70s, you knew who Lester Bangs was. He was one of the more esteemed rock critics of his day. He used to write for Crawdaddy, Cream, Circus, Rolling Stone. He was right up there with people like Robert Christgau. Bangs was interesting because he was an intellectual and understood sort of the meta of rock and roll. He was also, as you can see, very much a blue collar guy, very rough around the edges, and did not like the music industry at all. And in his own weird way, Banks was the truth teller because he's a Sagittarius, of course. So let's break down his chart a little. By the way, if you've ever seen the movie Almost Famous, he was portrayed by Philip Seymour Hoffman, who I think did a reasonable portrayal of the truculent and cynical Bangs. If you're going to be a rock critic or a critic in general, probably helps to have Virgo on the ascendant, especially at 0 degrees, and then to have Saturn there, right? Saturn, Virgo on the ascendant, the critic, big standards, tough standards. Now, clearly, this man does not look like a Virgo rising. He did not, although when you see younger pictures of Lester Bangs, he took better care of himself. But I would not say that this is the representation of somebody who's a Virgo rising. I think what you're getting more here is the moon in Taurus, right? And what's interesting is that he's got this moon conjunct Algol, and then over here he's got Pallas, right? And Pallas plays a huge role in his work because, you know, when you are a critic, you're looking for threads, you're looking for patterns, you're looking for kind of the meta meaning. And he was not as self-destructive as Hunter S. Thompson, but in his own way, he was kind of like the rock and roll version of Hunter S. Thompson. And what you get with Bangs is the moon, right? This is the moon on the midheaven. You know, it's kind of slovenly, right? It's in this T-square with Pluto and Venus. And it's really interesting because he's got Algol here. And for Bangs, I think cutting through the any blocks creatively are going to take place up here. And it's funny because down below, right, he's got the Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius, which is not uncommon in charts. Let me blow this up a little bit. But they're right on top of each other, right? They're totally on top of each other. And, you know, some people say, well, that's the Casimir effect or the Casimir effect. Really what it is it's somebody who identifies with their thoughts intensely. Like they are in some ways their thoughts. So when we look at the inconjunct here, traveling all the way to the top of the chart, all the way to the top of the chart, we got that moon at 25 Taurus. So this is the voice, right? This is the voice. And what he's trying to do is articulate a collective feeling or a gestalt, right? This is what the moon up here represents, kind of a gestalt, like this expression that people can relate to on an emotional level. What's interesting is the Bangs character portrayed by Philip Seymour Hoffman in Almost Famous kind of portrays that in some ways. Like he talks about like don't be friends with the band. They'll offer you all kinds of shit, but you can't write a truthful story, right? And so Bangs was aware of that. And again, he's kind of this interesting truth teller in rock and roll. And I was reading some of his stuff last night, and I'll just read something here from this one story. This is his kind of populist view, and this kind of again the sort of collective gestalt. I think everybody's a rock critic to that extent, to the extent that when you go into a record store and you decide to buy this one over that one, you're being a rock critic. I don't have any more credentials than anyone else. What I would say for myself is everybody knows my prejudices. I'm not God, and just because I write something doesn't make it right or wrong. And I think that being a rock critic, a lot of times, the impetus for me and a lot of people I knew was just that we really love rock and roll and wanted to talk about it, And there was this outlet. And what kind of makes me mad is a lot of times today, it looks like a lot of rock critics that are writing in these magazines. It's like a good way to get a start in a career in journalism or something, It's not, you don't sense a real passion for the music. And Bangs was really ahead of his time when he was asked about kind of where things are going. And let's see if I can find the quote. It's right here. It says, this guy asked him this question. One last question, Lester. People wanted to get into rock writing, rock criticism. Youngsters out there, maybe even people ready to give up their present career for another one. What advice would you have for them if it wasn't to not get into rock criticism? How would you advise them to go about it? And this is what he says. It's total Sagittarian take. I actually don't know because I'm so utterly alienated myself and utterly disgusted, to be quite frank, that I wonder if I really want to do anything in the next few years. See, the thing is, everything is turning into People magazine, like the radio, all the press, everything is turning into this, even the book industry. I was talking to my agent yesterday and I said to him, do you think it's going to reach the point where the only thing you can sell is a celebrity biography that's just a puff job? And he said, I don't know. I sit around and wonder if maybe the best thing I could do for myself as a writer would be just completely get away from all this stuff. That is a Sagittarian POV, right? Total Sagittarian. And he was right. Like Lester Bangs was right because that's where things were going. And his ability to comment on those things was being completely compromised. And Bangs had energy. He's got that Mars and Jupiter conjunction in his fifth house. So he loves rock and roll. I mean, when I think of rock and roll, I think of fifth house, 11th house, right? The band is an 11th house operation. When I say the band, I'm not talking about Robbie Robertson. I'm talking about the band as a concept, right? And then the fifth house is Leo and the lead singer. Like yesterday, we looked at Frank Sinatra. He had Leo on the midheaven. And so Frank was the guy, right? Frank, even though he had the true node in the moon true node in Uranus and Aquarius in his fourth house. Well, his band was his extended family, but it wasn't him, right? He was not the leader of the band, but he was the face of the band back in the big band days. And then he just became Frank. That's Leo shit, right? So the fifth house is pleasure, enjoyment, pastimes. And this is where Bangs becomes kind of an authority in this world. And it's clear that what he set out to do was to become an authority on something that he really loved, which was rock and roll, right? And he's got that Pluto in the 12th house, which again, it's in Leo. And I think Bangs was well aware of, and he talks about payola in the industry and corrupt. He was kind of based in his own way. But a lot of these things are, I think, challenging him for him to reconcile because he's got the moon up here in Taurus and he's dealing again with this kind of collective gestalt and trying to have a voice in some ways that reflects the voice of the public and vice versa. Because when you get up into that 10th house with the moon on top, right, you're really in this interesting place of like groups and crowds and followings and cults. It's all very lunar stuff, right? And yet, with the Moon Pluto square, I think Banks probably had a tendency to not want to have any part of that. And so he was, I think, constantly in a process of deconstructing his mythos, which I think a Sagittarian would do, right? And he's got this Uranus opposition up here, which I think is really, really interesting. So he's going to write, right? He becomes the embodiment of his own work. And, with that Uranus opposition, I think at any point in time, he could probably walk away from it. And, Bangs didn't live a long and healthy or long and healthy life. And he's kind of one of these casualties of the rock and roll era where had he stuck around much longer, it would not have been, it'd have been a worse ending for Lester Bangs because of the spirit that he kind of signed off on in the beginning was dead. He even, the Philip Seymour Hoffman character even talks about it in Almost Famous. He doesn't give a shit about money, right? It's clear, he's in it for whatever kind of Neptunian exchange can be had in the second house. He's not in it for the money. In fact, he probably blew a lot of his money. Right? Mars square Neptune, Jupiter square Neptune, addictions, whatever, right? Like he was not gonna leave much behind. And that's the spirit of rock and roll. And that is your True Hemp Science star of the day, Lester Bangs. True Hemp Science, of course, is a sponsor of the show. And if you go there and purchase $100 or more, just type in 15MINS, 15MINS. And what will you get? You get a free goodie bag with your order. Go there, check it out. They've got my buddy Chris has a 30-day money back guarantee on anything you buy and purchase. And if you spend $150 more, what do you get? You get free shipping. So there you go. There's your True Hemp Science star of the day, Lester Bangs. All right. Where are we? Let's see. I think we're out of here. There's a link if you want to join us over on Boxcast for the latest rendition of 15 Minutes of Flame. I'll be back tomorrow for the Astro Weather. Probably do one more 15 minutes tomorrow. And then Friday, all bets are off. Friday's move day. And moving during Mercury retrograde should be really interesting. I signed the contract, or I made the accommodations to move prior to Mercury retrograde, so I'm not really worried about it. As long as you have your agreements in place before Mercury retrograde, Mercury retrograde winds up being something different, and I think perhaps a lot more positive than just saying, okay, we're going to do this during this period or cycle. All right, thanks everybody. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible. Join me tomorrow once again here on the 11th house for another edition of the Astro Weather. Thank you.